The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
Mr. Torres, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking time and taking our questions. Let us start our conversation with a brief overview of the monitor, what it does, what type of publication it is, and why this focus on PPP.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting us. So the PPP Monitor is a flagship publication of Asian Development Bank. What it is really, it's more of a diagnostic tool for our developing member countries in trying to push the PPP agenda in their country. It has over 500 points of reference in terms of the upstream, diagnostic. So it's really there to be used by the government to inform them of the reform that can be taken, but also the business community if they want to invest or look into PPP opportunities in that country.
Yes. So what stage is the report? Because it's not out yet, right? It's not public yet.
Yes. So what we have done yesterday was to really showcase the key findings of the PPP Monitor, and then we plan to publish it. It will be available online in the next couple of weeks.
Wonderful. So what are the main findings for Georgia?
The main findings is that, in as much as there's already, a PPP law, which was established about 6 years ago now, and there's a regulation, there still needs some more to be done in terms of the capacity building. I think we need to push in terms of not just away from unsolicited proposal, but allow for a tender to invite more interested parties to the table.
What are some of the barriers to this point that this interest isn't there, or there is not sufficient interest in PPP projects in Georgia? What would you say?
Look, in terms of the interest, it's really probably more of the awareness of PPP. Because there's been a PPP transaction that's been done, mainly on the unsolicited, proposal type arrangement. So, meaning we haven't invited other parties to come in to the table for the discussion. And of course, in that kind of arrangement, we do not understand the full natural pricing of an infrastructure asset. We could be leaving potential value to the government and the public if we go in the route of really bidding it out to other potential investors out there.
What do you mean in other potential investors specifically?
Okay. If you look at the PPP monitors in terms of the finding, majority, over 90% of PPP that's been done to date has been in the energy sector, but under a unsolicited proposal, meaning a private party goes to the government and saying, here's my proposal, can I do a PPP with you on this basis? The PPP that we want to see more of is the kind of PPP whereby we explore the natural price of that particular asset so that then other parties can also bid out. The issue with this, of course, is that different parties have a different, say, risk appetite for the asset. And they could also bring other, innovations, technology, efficiency to the asset, which could make the bid stronger. The price determination is key, of course, and the innovation that gets added in to that formulation is relevant. Because sometimes, if they understand the asset and they know how to invest in it, they'll provide, a good price. And the government benefits from this, and so as the people.
So what would make this interest broader? If, for example, government were the initiator of the PPP project, or what? Because when I'm an investor and I'm coming with my project, of course, I want my interest to be in that project. I might not be open for other investors to come in and also participate. So what would broaden this pool of investors in such projects?
What would broaden it is that first and foremost, there is already a PPP law, right? And there's already regulations for it. the thing that will broaden it, of course, is that it gives opportunity for everyone to present what will be the value proposition for each of this private sector. Because if we just deal with one particular party, we are potentially missing out on the other proposals that may be out there, right? And that's why I said, with the PPP in terms of tendering it out, we tend to find the true value of that asset, right? And we've seen this in other jurisdictions as well, where they basically says, this is the asset that I have, and it's a public asset. And there's a value to that because it's really a monopoly asset. There's no other, there's no other asset that will be built. If you build a road project, you don't build another one. Or if there's an airport here, you don't build one right next to it. So there's a natural, value to a PPP asset that's government owned. It's all of the innovation, the efficiency, and not just the financing side from the private sector that will bring to bear a good PPP for the government and for its people.
How would you evaluate current situation in Georgia? Do you see such PPP projects in Georgia? You mentioned energy sector mainly.
Yeah. Actually, at the PPP monitor discussion yesterday that we had, we've looked at brownfield infrastructure assets as well. Because it's already there. It's been funded by development partners like ADB and others, and it's the risk is lower, so therefore the risk premium might be a good starting point, right? Get a cheaper kind of service provision for that asset. So that could be a good starting point for many of the investors. But of course, there'll be other assets that we, together with the government, can put together if this is like a national priority.
Yeah. Do you see it as a national priority at this point?
Well, there will be national priority, and I think that will be, that's for the government to decide, right? But I think we need to understand that the infrastructure need of Georgia is huge. Government funding is limited, and therefore we need to assess where can we find those pockets of money and partners that can further develop these assets that will be critical to the community and to the people at large.
What is the role of public-private dialogue in this process of building the PPP projects?
The dialogue is that PPP assets are public assets. It's the road that we take. It's the transport that we take. It's the energy that we consume. All of these are public assets. So basically, it's a public good. So therefore, we need the public interest, so is the government interest, but at the same time, we need to balance it out with what the private sector can offer. PPP is such a powerful mode of procuring public asset because it allows all of this basically government assets that are monopoly assets and bring in the private money and expertise to come in, not just in building it, I think, but more importantly, I think maintaining it for a long period of time. PPP is such a long-dated contract. It is really a contract arrangement between the public and the private, and that's why we need to make sure that these are structured properly with an equitable risk arrangement between the two parties.
Yes.
To deliver value for money.
Yes. What are the role of the prior examples of what happened to some of the PPP projects in Georgia? For example, Namakwani, for example, Anaklia. We know that this didn't end well. The investors went to the arbitration courts. So what could Georgia learn from this example?
Okay. As I said, I need to qualify that PPP is a procurement modality, right? And we should not look at the PPP as, this is the wrong way of doing things, but perhaps we need to look at how did those transactions evolve? Were they structured well enough that there's a balanced risk arrangement between the public and the private? We often blame the modality, the PPP, as the negative side, but I think, if you have all the laws which are now set up, you have the regulations set up, and the capacity of the people that will basically champion this in Georgia. It's really how we put together those in an element whereby, the demands of the government in terms of what it wants from that infrastructure and how it will deliver it to the people, but also the demands of the private sector. That's really a balance arrangement.
Consensus,
And
yes.
you need to kind of like flesh that out to a very detailed. That's why PPP sometimes take longer to kind of like formulate, but it's a dialogue. And it's an asset that you partner for 10, 15, 20 years. So it's very long term.
What would you say is the best practice, so to say, of managing PPP projects? What are some of the amendments to the law or some of the other arrangements that Georgia could be looking at this
As I
point?
said, the good thing that there's already a PPP law. And there's also a regulation that support that. There's also a unit within the government that champions PPP. One thing that we've identified in the PPP monitor is that the law doesn't allow for the for the asset to be assigned to, say, a lender. PPP transactions by nature are highly levered, highly geared, and you hear about 20% equity investment versus an 80% debt per se, or 70-30. So either way, a lot of these assets are funded heavily by project finance debt. Now, this is one limiting factor happening in Georgia. What we've identified is because under the law, it cannot assign some of those assets to the lender, right? And that could be a limiting factor, and that's perhaps one of the reasons why lenders in the market are not willing to provide more money to this. PPP, for it to flourish, would require partnership not just with the government and the investor in terms of their equity investments, but also with the lenders. So this is something that all of this need to work together.
Mm-hmm. So, what is the ratio of this, and why do you think lenders are not participating in this?
It's perhaps it's the awareness, it's the experience of the lenders. They're not comfortable to the risk exposure as yet. But as I said, one thing that we've identified in the PPP monitor in terms of our diagnostic is that, under the law, we cannot still assign the asset to the lender. Should something happen, should something happen to the project and we stop collecting money, typically the lender, the commercial banks, have asking for a right to manage the assets, because at the end of the day, they just want to get their money back.
Money back, of course.
In the law, doesn't have this provision as yet. But at the same time, I think in the general market in Georgia, many of the lenders, just go by the corporate kind of lending instead of a long-dated project finance. That still needs to go up the curve together with the other capacity, because the laws is there, the regulations are there. The unit that champions this is already there too. But we of course need to push for more learning. Learning by doing is important. You have a PPP unit center here now in Georgia, in support of PPP. We need to perhaps put more of those PPP cells with the different departments so that then they can say, yes, I can identify a project, I can screen a project for PPP, let's take it to the process. It is this part that's still missing, of taking the whole cycle to this, because there's already a risk management process that protect the government's interest in terms of contingent liability. There's a PPP law, there's a regulation, there's a unit set up for it. We just need to have all of that, get more, experience and lessons from actually doing a PPP project that we could tender out to the market.
So what are some of the specific recommendations that, for example, ADB might have and the government might be looking at putting in place?
This specific one is, with the PPP monitor, as I said, it's a diagnostic of the PPP enabling environment. We've also put together a PPP roadmap, which informed the country partnership strategy between ADB and also the Georgia government. Now, this partnership paper outlines what are the type of things that we can work together as a partner in pushing the PPP agenda, so as other interventions that we plan to do. Those are listed, and we've looked at potential opportunities in the social sector, in the transport sector, and also in the energy sector. So it's quite various sectors.
Yeah. So what are some of the specific?
Specific.
So that because we don't have a report yet, so we cannot read it. So that's why I'm asking you, what could be the what are some of the specific recommendations?
Those specific.
What are some of the steps of this roadmap that you mentioned?
Okay. I
think the most important ones.
The specific would basically, as I said, I think it would need to be fleshed out, between ADB and the government agency in terms of what they want, because there needs to be a consistency between long-term planning of the infrastructure development in the country. You can't just say, okay, the port of Anacleon needs to be one, or I think it needs to be a systematic thing, because government would need to be able to provide funding support to many of these projects. So you look at your balance sheet as a government, you look at your priorities in terms of your infrastructure development, and then you work from there. And the PPP Center can kind of articulate that, and we can work with them on this. As I said,
so the first step is to have some kind of a holistic strategy of what the government wants, and this is not in place right now.
Sort of and we were working with the PPP agency. It's really this pipeline of bankable projects is important. The private sector is always looking for opportunities, both local and also international, and they need to be able to see that these are bankable, these are viable projects. So I'll go back to my initial point that I think for the PPP to really surge or get a kick up is that we do by learning. Let's just do a project, we tender it out, get the market to test their feed into the Georgian market, and then if that's successful, then others will follow. And we learn from that process in terms of what do the investors want, what do the project financiers want, and more importantly, of course, what does government want incorporated into the design of an infrastructure project that can be procured via the public-private partnership.
So as I understand from what you told me right now is that there is lack of successful PPP projects in Georgia as well.
That's been tendered out for bidding, yes.
Yes, and just to sum up our conversation, what needs to be done at this point? I understand that this is to draft a holistic strategy and to work on bringing more interest to the investors.
Yes.
But how does this monitor, since it is a diagnostic thing, does it also evaluate the overall business environment?
Yes.
For example, how institutions are working in Georgia. For example, we know there's some problems with courts and independence of courts in Georgia. Do you think this overall business environment, business stability in the country also affects these long-standing projects?
Well, as I mentioned, the PPP monitor highlights, the overall enabling environment for PPPs. And some of the points that we've raised earlier are there, and therefore, again, it just gives more guidance to the government in terms of what are the key priorities that we could look at. Of course, we can partner with the government in trying to kind of address a lot of this stuff, but also with the overall development partner community that is assisting the Georgian government to push the PPP agenda.
Is this the first report for Georgia?
We have updated this, and we keep revisiting, the PPP monitor every country partnership strategy cycle. And the country partnership strategy cycle is our engagement cycle with the government. And in this case, there is a country partnership strategy 2024 to 2028, and that's why we have looking at the diagnostic for PPP enabling environment in Georgia.
So we can say that for the second time, for the second report, Georgia still lacks the holistic strategic view of what it wants to do with its infrastructure programs and how it wants to approach PPP?
I would say that it's actually progressing. I would not, dwell on the lack of things. I think I would dwell on the progression of things. And in terms of the trajectory, I'm quite positive that, the government is actually dedicated to pushing the PPP agenda in the country. And that's all positive, right? So it's moving to that right steps.
Yeah, we'll count the projects then.
Sorry?
We will count the projects then.
Yeah.
That
of
will
course.
be the best indicator of how it progresses, I guess, right?
No, I think, and the success of those projects will be critical to basically, giving the market a stronger confidence to work with the government on pushing all the PPP projects on the ground.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.